to Christianity, where now we're experiencing the divine secondhand, it was the counterculture of direct experience. And what Jeffrey Raff says is the alchemists did not believe that imagination created what it saw, but rather imagination served as their organ of perception through which the imaginal world could be perceived. You know, the alchemist does have a creative role. And this is interesting about creativity, is the alchemist does have a creative role, but not in the sense that it makes up these images, but rather that through its perception, through its organ of perception, which is the imagination, it transforms the images, is transformed by them, and gives them more solidity and depth, as well as a deeper relationship to themselves and as the person that perceives them. Just a second. I got another person coming in. There we go. Hi, Lisa. Anyway, then so perception is creation because it gives solidity and depth to the images which we which we see, but don't really, you know, they're not really us, you know, are something we created. We just saw them as the organ of perception. So the entities experienced through imagination have their own autonomy and reality. They are not products of our own fantasy. Divine imagination is experienced through the spiritual center, the divine organ of perception, which all humans possess but rarely experience. Unlike fantasy, the divine imagination does not need human effort to be brought into being. We experience it as something happening to us. You know, that's why intuition is known as one of the, intuition and sensation are known as the irrational functions of the psychological types, because they are only happen to us, you know, and where thinking and feeling are more consciously related. But anyway, these are experiences that just happen to us and over which we have no control. These moments of this sudden deepening, which you experience in your divine imagination, are magical and totally convincing. And Barbara Hanna said that that you would, in her active imaginations, what she mostly did by writing, you know, is she would, it would seem very, you know, not that magical for a long time. And then suddenly she'd say she'd have maybe just a momentary sudden deepening that was magical. So the idea, you know, as well, is, I just want to show you, this was quite a revelation to me. Maybe it'll be to you too, is, let's see, there we go. Okay, when Gabriel is blowing his horn, he's not awakening the dead, he's awakening your soul. I mean, he's awakening your dead soul. So, I mean, this is the purpose of this trumpet blast by this divine messenger. It's not to awaken those who have departed Earth, but it is to awaken our unrecognized, neglected soul. You know, and so that was a kind of a revelation to me, really, that happened. And you know, I had we'll go into. I thought we'd do a little bit on if thou would moisten this dry earth, because it kind of tells you about what. But I had a dream, and an active imagination that really encapsulated this. Is I had this dream that this is just this last week, that I'm walking into this room, And there is Sophia, the goddess of wisdom, seated on the floor. And I have a note for her, you know, and I give her this note. And it is a note from the one that she's to unite with. You know, this is the her other side that she's supposed to unite with. And she reads it, and I watch her reaction to it. But then suddenly, like a film is being wound back, walking backwards, I take her note, and I walk backwards, and I go out the door. Okay? So it never happened. I just had a glimpse of it. So now Sophia didn't get this note. I didn't go in the room and give it to her. It didn't happen. But then suddenly I go back into the room again. But now who's in the room with me? Not just Sophia, who I'm supposed to give the note to, but also the anima, my soul, is with me. And now I give the note to Sophia. Okay, so then I do an active imagination. I say, what does this mean? You know, and the soul, or the anima, said to me, she says, you cannot witness the wedding of Sophia without me. It won't happen. And she says, imagine your life without me. What would your life be without me? And yet you neglect me and you pay no attention to me. And the way that we do pay attention to her is we lend her our ego consciousness. And the way we lend her our ego consciousness is not through the ordinary reality of daily life, you know. Although, you know, like Marie-Louise von Franz says, an individuated person is one who's in an active imagination all the time. But anyway, she's saying that the only way that you can witness the wedding of Sophia, the goddess of wisdom, and this is really, you know, the conjunctio of the second or third conjunctio, she says, is through being united with me. So unless I, you know, recognize her, make her a part of my own awareness by lending her my awareness and letting her come to life in my awareness. See, that's the whole idea of the imaginal world, of not communicating with the imaginal world, of not communicating with the with the inner figures in our life. That is the world without the soul. Imagine what your life would be without me. And this is what Gabriel is trying to awaken in us. But the only way that we can awaken it is to lend them our awareness. And we lend them our awareness through meditation and through letting these figures come up. And one thing that they say about the imagination, it's not spirit, okay? It is the realm where the physical and the spiritual are one phenomena. You know, this is what they call subtle bodies, and it's the third eye. You know, when you're talking about the third eye, you're talking about the eye that can witness the synchronistic, or live in, or reside in, or have access to the same realm that is the synchronistic world. And the synchronistic world is the world where the spiritual and the physical, which really are one phenomenon. And that's what Teilhard de Chardin said, that that matter is spirit that's slowed down enough so we can see it. You know, but this is really
so. Craig, I'm wondering, like, what you just read and shared about your dream triggered me in so far as a memory of something I just saw the other day. And you know, it's quite a dramatic little story, but I guess everybody who maybe has listened to what you just said, perhaps if they meditated on it, and maybe it might happen just very quickly like it did for me, there's a synchronicity created.
Well,
Anyway.
yeah. Well, the synchronicity basically, really, and we talked about. Was that you, Charles, last time that talked about deja vu? And I think
Oh no, that was Nicholas.
Oh yeah, Nicholas. Well, the idea of experiencing synchronicity is you are experiencing the realm where we don't reside, but there is in reality the world where the spirit and the matter world are one. And see, the problem is our three-dimensional awareness, our brain doesn't perceive that. Yet we do have access to it, but the only way we have access to it is through what's called the lumen natura, or the light of nature. Is to try to access this awareness that existed before consciousness, or this is the awareness that makes well, right now we're having a big ice storm here in Iowa. Even before it started, we were just flooded with birds at our bird feeder. So the master bird was telling the birds who don't have this ego consciousness, so who are open to the wisdom, this field of knowledge that was accessible to shamans, and to the people who would, the shamans could tell you where the buffalo herd was. If they were a really good shaman, they could say, well, it's that way, and so then they take their wigwams and put them on their, what do they call those things, they travois, and pull them along, and they go in the direction of the buffalo herd. Well, somebody was telling them that. Well, that's the imaginal world. This is the world where everything is known. It's what's called absolute knowledge. But anyway, the idea is, the way it was put to me is, imagine what life would be without me. Imagine.
Now, could I just, in a nutshell, because I know you want to get along with what you want to read and such, but let me just try to, I won't be able to do it justice because it's just too powerful, but I'll try to encapsulate it. So what I saw, and I'll send it to you, it's a Facebook recording video of a demonstration being performed by these young women who are maybe only in their late teens, early 20s, I would say. And they are protesting the abuse of animal agriculture. And the protest that they launched was because some of them had infiltrated a very large industrial pig processing plant. And they photographed, they allege they photographed what's called a gestation chamber or cage, where a female pig is put into a confined cage and it's forced to, give birth to these piglets. And the mother pig in this cage gets very damaged, and the nipples of the pig get to the point where they've been injured and they're bleeding. And so these pigs are suckling on blood. And these young ladies protesting this store have taken their tops off in the cold weather. They're standing out there and they've got fake blood poured all over their nipples. And they're protesting the abuse of these animals and connecting it with essentially the abuse of women, in society, and the violence against the feminine. So it's very powerful. And to me, it just resonated with what you're saying with respect to maybe I feel kind of guilty because they're saying, please share this out. But I'm thinking, although I'm very sympathetic, you're going up against very powerful corporations, and what's the liability of just sharing something like that out? I don't know. Am I just overly concerned? But I feel a sense of guilt. Anyway, that's the story encapsulated.
Well, I would say the one aspect of that is that I pick up on is that at one point when we were more one with our environment and our landscape, and we respected, we had to eat food, but we were when we ate it, we would do a ritual of thanks to the animal, and they'd often, after they had harvested, or whatever you want to call the animal, they would cover its head so that its eyes wouldn't be seen, and anyway, that was a there we go. Anyway, that is an aspect of the loss of nature. I mean, the loss of this access to this wisdom that we don't have in this. It wasn't so many generations ago where we lived in groups of 20 to 50 to maybe 100 people who would move about and were hunter-gatherers and who were one with their landscape, and this was their world, and it was seamless with the source of their lives, that Sophia gave them. I mean, she's the source of all life, so you're communing with Sophia and wisdom of nature all the time. So then you move from there into the box world, and with divisions of labor and everything. I mean, it's very alien to our the way we were shaped, and so this is why we are broken. I mean, ego consciousness is a separation from our original source, and this is what this term dissolve and coagulate means. You separate and to gather together, separate and gather together. You're not going to be able to be a vehicle for the imaginal world unless you have this ego consciousness, because that's what we're lending our awareness to, so that we can bring this wisdom can experience itself in the outer world, through our ego consciousness. So here's our platform for us to be aware and for us to speak and to use grammar and to use vocabulary and to express very subtle things like you would see in artwork or whatever. I mean, this is very subtle. But anyway, I mean, that's the real need for ego consciousness, is to lend it back to our life, our source of life, so that it can speak as well. I mean, that's the idea of active imagination, really, is to take this strange creature, ego consciousness, and have it suddenly realize that it's not the master in its own house, it's the servant of its source. And what is it, and how does it serve it? It lends it its awareness so it can speak, and it can speak to someone, which is us, and through that create the symbol of meaning, and to create this beautiful dance, where it has all this beauty in it, and Tim has all these beautiful paintings, but if no one sees them, then I mean, they're not real. And that's why Jung would say that the images long for the light. They long for the light. Well, what's the light? The light is the light of ego consciousness and our awareness. So you can see that this is just one hypothesis for the meaning of life, or ego consciousness. You need ego consciousness, or the divine needs ego consciousness to become aware itself, because it can't, it needs to have this flow of energy. If it's all by itself, there's no flow of energy. It needs someone who it can have a dialogue or a dance with. And who's that? That's its most marvelous creation, which is the what Agnella Jaffe called not Homo sapiens, but Homo mythicus, or symbol or meaning making man, that it's going to have this dialogue with. But anyway, that's what I guess we're trying to focus on, is, and it says, and this is kind of nature itself speaking. It says, think that you can find your this is the kind of awareness that we're talking about, the wisdom of nature. Okay, think that you can find your home in the haunts of every living creature, that you are everywhere at once, on land, at sea, in heaven, that you are not yet begotten, that you are in the womb, that you are young, that you are old, that you have died, that you are in the world beyond the grave. You grasp in your thought all of this at once, all times, all places, and you've experienced the divine. Now, this is the world that we're, trying to have this dialogue with. And it sends these wonderful images. I mean, it's just these wonderful, so subtle, so beautiful images. But anyway, it is, I'm just saying that as far as Jung was concerned, and after the Red Book, and we know what he's really was about. I mean, if you're interested in Jungian psychology, this is what it is. It is having access to this source. And what Marie-Louise von Franz, who was his major research assistant, and he told Barbara Hanna, who lived with her, that she's really a genius. He told her she's a genius. Anyway, she said that what he meant by individuation or wholeness was that you're not only an active imagination when you're doing your meditation and you're dialoguing with the self or dialoguing with the inner figures, you are doing it all the time. I mean, you're just walking around with an ability. And, I think people who do Zen can do this too. I mean, I used to do meditation 2 or 3 hours a day, for a while, but not on weekdays, but on Saturday and Sunday. But I would, I just be in a Zoom all the time, and I think, and that's what Daisetsu Suzuki said, it's the guy that introduced Zen to the Western world. They ask him, what is it like to have Satori? He says, oh, it's no different from regular life, except that your feet are 4 inches off the ground, So I mean, this is being an active imagination all the time. So anyway, I just thought that was a little bit of an introduction, to the, if you want to just start with this thing. Let's see if I can get it up here. This is, if thou wouldst moisten this dry earth, and Edward Edinger says that this is like being in an analytical hour with Jung, that you're bringing a dream to him, and he's analyzing it for you, and telling you, what does this mean for me? Well, he's sort of telling you here, and he's telling all of us, because Edinger said this is a very typical dream. If thou knowest how to moisten this dry earth with its own water, thou wilt loosen the pores of the earth. I think Johan, when he was here, told us that was what they do in South Africa, is they weep, and their tears moisten the dry earth. So that. So I can. Does anybody want to read the first paragraph, or I could read it? But anyway, it's a amplification.
I could read it for you if you want.
Just 190. Yeah, if you can see it. Did I make it big enough?
190.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have my reading glasses, but let me give it a whirl.
Okay.
If you will contemplate your lack of fantasy, of imagination, and
inspiration.
Okay, maybe you better read it. I don't have my reading glasses.
I'm sorry. Well, it's just, if you will.
I could get them.
I'm sorry. If you will contemplate your I can't read without him either, so join the club.
Try it if you want.
Yeah, go ahead, Tim.
I'll go get mine, so when you want something else read, I'll have them.
There you go.
I don't want to hear my voice all day long.
If you will contemplate your lack of fantasy, of inspiration and inner aliveness, which you feel as sheer stagnation and a barren wilderness, and impregnate it with the interest born of alarm at your inner death, then something can take shape in you, for your inner emptiness conceals just as great a fullness if only you will allow it to penetrate into you. If you prove receptive to this call of the wild, the longing for fulfillment will quicken the sterile wilderness of your soul as rain quickens the dry earth. Thus, the soul to the labyrinth, staring glumly at his stove and scratching himself behind the ear because he has no more ideas.
Yeah. Well, okay, let's talk about that, something, how this applies to us. Okay, just the first couple comma things. If you will contemplate your lack of fantasy, your lack of inspiration, your lack of inner aliveness, which you feel as sheer stagnation. This is what people come to Jung for, because of their sheer stagnation and the barren wilderness, and impregnate it with an interest born of alarm at your inner death. Now let's just talk about that for a second. I think he's saying here is that what is the cause of the stagnation, the barren wilderness, and the alarm at your inner death? Is there anybody? He says it's your lack of fantasy, your lack of inspiration, your lack of inner aliveness. This is the cure. That's one thing. What is it? The Buddha says, all life is suffering. And he says, well, is there a cure? Is there a cure for suffering? Yes, there is a cure.
Could I also just add that this, why we have the lack, or we lose our imagination, thinking of what psychologist, well, actually, he's a medical doctor, Gabor Mate says, is that so much of our psychological difficulties is from childhood trauma, and thinking that the child, although born into this world as a wild animal, is nevertheless a very imaginative animal initially. But I think maybe because are we born into a psychologically unbalanced or ill at ease world paradigm that smothers that imagination in some people very quickly, and some people maybe not so much.
That's exactly what needs to happen. Is you need to give birth. This is the second birth. This is really what he's talking about, is this lack of inner aliveness and this alarm at your inner death. Is the inner death is the death of this ego that's disconnected from nature, from the wisdom of the light of nature. And so what needs to happen is that ego is going to die, but what needs to be reborn is a third center of awareness, which is what is called the moon child. You know, this is our second child. This is the moon child, where we now go back to. I remember when we were looking at those. You know, where you had to go through the 4 stages. Edinger has this thing where you go through the 4 stages, and I mean it's the 3 conjunctions or whatever, but you go through when you're born, you're 1. When you go into the mother world, you're 2. There's you and the mother. Then when you leave the mother world and go into the father world, now you're you, mother, and the father. And then when you leave the mother and the father, now you're you, your mother, your father, and the world. Okay, then you need to go back. You need to combine. You combine your soul with your you, and then you go back through that set. That's the rebirth. So a lot of the trauma that we face in life, James Hillman always used to say that doesn't affect the next moment. I mean, that you need to somehow integrate that or become some type to make some peace with that. I mean, yeah, Jung said about, as far as the shadow was concerned, he was, I think, quoting Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount, where he said, I maybe you guys can remember this, but the least of these are your brethren, or I mean, I can't remember exactly what the quote is, but he said, Jung says, imagine if the least of these that need to be your brother is you. You're the least of these, your shadow, that aspect of you that you feel worthless or whatever, you need to accept that part of you. So this is kind of the where you have integrated the shadow. Okay. So, or those aspects of you that are horrible, you somehow, achieve a sense of peace with those. Okay. Then the next, then you're ready for the eternal. You're ready to have your moon child, so, but that needs to happen first. And I think,
Hey, Craig.
Yes, go ahead.
One thing I've been thinking about a lot, I've been in conversation with a couple of young people, and I've really been thinking a lot about the difference between the approach of a person over 40 to a person under 40. And it seems to me that difficulty is one of the things that drives us into an individuation, because otherwise you can just slide through life. And we've created this culture where, at least in the outer world, almost all of our problems are already solved.
Yes.
And so I look at my niece, who is 17 years old, and she grows up in this incredibly friendly world where she really doesn't have to even approach the most prescient issues of life because everything is so easy.
Well, yeah,
And so I think that there's a certain role that is played by fate, that it drives us into the avenue of individuation just by the strength of difficulty. And part of the problem with such an easy culture is that we're creating a generation who doesn't know how to approach difficulties.
well, yeah, and it's
Is it an easy culture? Is it an easy culture, or is it a culture that is just too loaded up with means of escape? You know, like people can just dive and spend the rest of their life in their staring at their iPhone, or, you know, worse yet, they can just get hooked on so many different chemical substances now. You know, I'm not sure that it's an easier world, but maybe just one with too many opportunities to go and to become nihilistic, I guess, is maybe what I'm saying.
Well, it seems to me that the one of the brilliant roles of evil as it appears in the world, or darkness, is that it absolutely drives everybody into engagement with life. And I totally agree with you that we have so many distractions. You can spend your whole life avoiding everything that comes up by either plunging into entertainment or numbing out with drugs or alcohol or something. Mm-hmm. And it seems like indigenous cultures and cultures that have preceded our modern world, you really couldn't avoid all this stuff so easily. You still had to get up and go find the firewood and, you know, go out and sort of conquer the outer world. But it seems like there's so many people who, especially the youngest generation, are growing up in this world where they really don't have to conquer anything.
I guess I would like to comment on that, considering I am someone that's under 40, and I don't know where I was reading it, but Marie-Louise von Franz said somewhere that you know, people that have a life of where there's plenty outer challenges, they tend to be spared as far as inner world challenges and problems go. And I guess people that have kind of an easy outer life that's very comfortable, they tend to develop inner problems very severely. And it's just, it just polarizes the other way. And I think a lot of people would agree that, you know, a lot of young people are kind of like silently suffering, though they're not really physically put through too much trouble. They are psychologically suffering, and especially in the way of lack of meaning. And I was going to comment earlier, this kind of post-industrial revolution world that we find ourselves in, I feel like makes the average individual view everything as purely material. So these people have, I don't know, it's a extremely easy outer life, and then are told to also ignore their inner life, but that's where their problems tend to be manifesting. So yeah, I don't know. That's my thoughts.
Well, that's exactly the problem. What you know, Jung will actually talk about this in a couple paragraphs, is what he called outer sulfur. You know, this is where you you know, where Ettinger calls this that where you are constantly wanting something new. You know, you always want something new. You always want something new. You always are looking for aliveness, some kind of aliveness. But instead of looking at within yourself, you're looking for it in the outer world. And he says, once you get it, you find you didn't want, that isn't what I wanted. You know, I mean, so, you know, it is just this constant search for something that doesn't really exist, you know, and it's.
So can I ask Charles, as a person under 40, what is it that interests you in the inner life? What is it that, how come you're not just out, you know, looking for entertainment? You're really searching on in the inner world.
Well,
That's a question.
always been kind of an introvert and recluse, and I actually originally got into this stuff through conspiracy theories and things, but got onto Egyptian mythology, and then I just had a dream one night that made me realize, oh wow, there is actually something to this, and that mythology holds truth, that it's absolutely true. I not in so much in a factual sense, but then ever since then, I was like the ancient mysteries, Egyptian mythology, the different. I became obsessed with knowing what the ancients thought as far as spirituality. But I was a weird case. Like, I never actually had to go to school. That was another weird thing. I mean, I didn't have to go to public school and get kind of like processed and told what to think. I got to stay home and do whatever I want. And one day stumbled onto a mythology, and then, from there I realized that, and then I started paying attention to my dreams and having really weird synchronistic kind of mystical experiences, and then became very alienated because I couldn't talk to anyone about what I actually found most important in life. And so, yeah, I mean, it's kind of how that's why I'm not out. I mean, I've known plenty of people that have met a perilous end because I don't know what I put it down to, but yeah, they're out there looking in the external world for something divine. They're searching for something divine that's inside, but they end up, I mean, right now it's all heroin. All these people my age, they're all hooked on these substances that create this euphoria, what I would put down as a imitation of love, but you can only really truly get that from the divine, and they're just looking outside, because that's all they've ever known. It's all they've ever been taught, is that there is the outer world, and that is that, and dreams are a bunch of nonsense, and don't pay attention to them.
Well, they're looking for what Jung told Roland Hazard, who was having problems with addiction. He says, spiritus contra spiritum. He says, what you're looking for in addiction is God, but you're not looking for it within yourself. You're looking for it outside yourself. And this is what he says, this is in the symbolic life. What are they looking for? There's nothing to be looked for. That's perfectly true. You can see them, these traveling tourists, always looking for something, always in the vain hope of finding something. On my many travels, I've found people who were on their third trip around the world uninterruptedly, just traveling, seeking. I met a woman in Central Africa who had come up alone in a car from Cape Town and wanted to go to Cairo. What for? I asked. What are you trying to do that for? And I was amazed when I looked into her eyes, the eyes of a hunted, a cornered animal, seeking, always in the hope of something. I said, what in the world are you seeking? What are you waiting for? What are you hunting after? She was nearly possessed. She's possessed by so many devils that chase her around. And why is she possessed? Because she does not live a life that makes sense. Hers is an utterly, grotesquely banal, utterly poor, meaningless, with no point in it at all. She's killed today, nothing happened, nothing's vanished, because she was nothing. But if she could say, I am the daughter of the moon. Every night I must help the moon, my mother, over the horizon. Ah, that would be something else. Then she lives. Then her life makes sense, and makes sense in all continuity and for the whole of humanity. That gives her peace when people feel that they are living the symbolic life, that they are the actors in a divine drama. That gives the only meaning to human life. Everything else is banal, and you can dismiss it. A career, producing of children, are all Maya compared with the one thing that your life is meaningful. That's stated a little bit strongly, but
could I just say that what I described those girls, those young ladies doing was living the symbolic life and participating in the divine drama.
Well, I would say that they're trying to get it in the outer world, but you know what Jung says, when you look into the he who looks in the outer world dreams, and he who looks inside awakes. I mean, what they rather than I'm now listen, I'm not saying anything. I think you can be interested in social justice. That's very important. But you also have to give daily attention to your soul. So
well, I would say I would agree with Miles that what they're doing is they are engaging the meaningful layer of their life, and certainly they do it using the outer circumstances. But what they're doing is kind of sacrificing their the immediate comfort for the greater service. They're serving some goddess that needs their
there's something internal. That's being generated from their self, and I think personally that I'd almost say must be like an enunciation. Like, I know I'm going maybe out of my lane, but I almost think there must be an enunciation in the young feminine that I don't have a right to even perhaps discuss, but that's my sense, and I think that's what's motivating them. And Martin Sheen, he just got arrested in front of Washington, the Capitol building down there, and
for like the 700th time or something like that, a huge number of times he's been
arrested. And if you listen to his speech, try to find it, and he says, it will be the women that save the planet, and I believe that, and it's demonstrated with some of these expressions that I just mentioned.
And I think they will save the planet by using their bodies. The women can use their bodies in a way that men cannot. And we see this, for instance, in the Nigerian tradition, where traditionally in the indigenous society, the council, the tribal council was mostly a masculine event. But if the women felt like they weren't being heard, they would go before the council and threaten to take their clothes off. And they've even done this in the legislature, before the legislature in the last few years, with the environmental degradation caused by the oil companies there. The women will go to the legislature and say, if you don't hear us, we're going to take off our clothes. And sure enough, the legislature, they almost bow down to these women and say, okay, I'm sorry, there is a kind of power in the female body that men simply don't have access to. And it seems to me that one of the things that they're doing is they are honoring the goddess by making us all aware that this is a reality we have to deal with.
Well, I do agree with that completely. The only thing I would add to that, though, is I just would say, one time someone asked Jung to lend his support to a social cause, and he said they just looked at him, or he just looked at them and said, "I'm doing alchemy now," and they were surprised at how detached he was, and you know, he kind of states it here. Now, I'm just giving you another case, okay? I'm not saying, I do agree that, you know, you have to be, make a difference in the outer world, but this was on the eve of World War II, when after, you know, I think after Czechoslovakia had been annexed, Austria had been annexed, and so, you know, the Munich Accords had been thrown away, you know, and so it was a very tense time in Europe. And this is what Jung says. It says, last semester we were concerned with a very difficult question, that of active imagination. I gave you some historical examples to enable you to gain some understanding of this process. The problem of active imagination is a question which is not exactly popular today in a world where we hear nothing but war and rumors of war, and where our culture is threatened. I endeavor, however, to show you another aspect of our soul and to support introversion, another aspect of our soul. So there's another aspect in addition to, this is the case of supporting introversion. In the present day Weltanschauung, it is, but it is a matter of indifference to me whether it is popular or not. So I shall follow this path undisturbed by the different pacts which are being made. They will only be broken in any case. The only thing I'm saying is that know what we're doing. I mean, the thing I'm saying about, you know, going through this thing about if thou wouldst moisten this dry earth, if the symbolic life, the act of paying attention to our soul every day and giving it spiritual food, is that this is the inward road. Now there's an outward road and there's an inward road. But what my soul said to me is, imagine a life without me. Imagine a life where you did not bring me into awareness. So, I mean, this has nothing to do with the importance of being a force of love in the outer world, you know, and being an example to other people and resonating with your power. But who was it once say, everybody's always wanting to make the world better, but no one individually is trying to be better. You know, I mean, with the idea here is, if we're talking about Jungian psychology, okay, you know, I'm just trying to say, if you're going to do Jungian psychology, or do Jungian psychology, and not just read about Jungian psychology, doing Jungian psychology means to lend our awareness to the inner world so that it can become real and manifest in our own world. And this is not contradicting any other way of being. But again, this is what I think is something that there is a thirst for. I mean, you know, these people who are 40 years old and are trying to find all their, you know, this is what one thing Ettinger said is, once we lost the symbolic life, which we at least had some semblance of in at least the Catholic Church, and some in Protestant, where there were these symbols which we could, you know, identify with in our divine life. Once those disappeared for a lot of people who are in the secular world, they try to find other ways to project the archetype of wholeness on, you know, and often that is through materialism, through science, through social justice, through anything like that. And what Ettinger said is those are containers that are not large enough to contain the divine projection.
Well, I'm seeing a real difference here between social justice and materialism, for instance. So I think materialism is an escape, and social justice is an attempt to try to connect with something larger than yourself.
Mm-hmm. But what do you think about your
me,
soul? How do you address the problem of what do you think of as far as the reality of having a soul that you're not paying attention to? I mean, or the importance of it, let's say, is something that we should think about.
Well, with something like materialism or addiction or anything like that, you're searching for the transcendent, but you're having a relationship with a dead object. And with social justice, you're still striving to connect with something cosmic, but you're actually in relationship with something that is alive. And to me, that's a much easier pathway to actually finding the soul. And I can see what Jung was talking about, that a cause can can fulfill the same kind of role as an addiction, where if you get too involved in it, you lose track of what's happening to your soul. But for those who don't have a faith or an avenue to the inner world, it seems like a social avenue is a much closer to the truth than something like trying to relate with an object.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's basically, he mentioned that there were two ways of being. You know, one way of being is to become a conduit for the inner divine in the outer world. I mean, this would be living in your personality number two. And this resonance, this was the opinion of the Jungians, who happen to also, keep in mind, we're all introverts, you know, mostly intuitive introverts. So they have you know, as far as the blind people looking at the elephant, you know, they've got their opinion of the elephant, you know, and then you've got the extroverted people. Well, that path he called the life of utter devotion. You know, this would be Mother Teresa, you know, in India, who gives her life to the people who are the homeless and the people who are sick, and I think also Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, you know, was you know, devoting her life to the people in hospice and things. This is the life of utter devotion. But the fact that it is utter devotion, you know, it has to be, can't be one-sided. So in other words, you can't, you know, it has to be like Mother Teresa. What was Mother Teresa's side? You know, Mother Teresa's side was being of service, you know, to others. And here's another aspect of it that I think is also the extroverted route is, Jung said that people who had suffered grievous wounds, you know, a wound that can't be healed, the only way they can heal it is to be of service to someone who's suffered a similar wound. So, you know, I think that as an introvert, you know, I tend to, you know, gravitate towards the inner route, you know, which is to awaken this divine awareness and having it be with me and lending my awareness to it through meditation, you know, and I would think pretty sure this is what Jung was after. And so, I mean, as far as Jungian psychology would be concerned, they would be interested in this aspect of life where someone who is more, you know, extroverted and devoted to the outer world is going to be somewhat of the hero archetype. You know, I mean, they're going to be the this one who's going to you know, be a someone in the outer world that's a hero, you know, and or not they're going to embody the hero archetype. They're not going to be themselves a hero, but you know, I mean, the one thing I'll just show you, this was what Edinger was talking about, and I did this myself, drew this design, is this, let me see here, is, so I haven't got it yet. Okay, there we go. Oop, I didn't get it. Well, anyway, it's the object of looking at, let me see here, I got it right here. Okay. Well, anyway, it's this. I am perfectly. There's no contradiction, as far as I'm concerned, between the life of the devotion to the outer world and the devotion to the inner world. But as far as Jung's books and what Jungian psychology is about, it's about the devotion to the inner world. You know, I mean, being a conduit of the inner world, and this is also related somewhat to art and things. And of course, Edinger was a introvert as well. But I mean, here's one thing he was saying about the difference between the difference between the inner root and the outer world. He says if the images of myth, now he's talking about the images of myth, and these are the images of the imaginal world. Remember, the third eye, or the ability to be in touch with the imaginal world, is an organ of perception. It's an organ of perception of a reality that's accessible to you, but the only way it can be accessible to you is to awaken to it. And this is what Gabriel is blowing his horn about. So he said, if the images of the myths do not provide an adequate bridge to the self, which is the center of psychic wholeness, he says they fall into the archetypal contents fall into containers that are too small for them. And then he just mentioned some of them: career, narcissism, cults, fundamentalism, and so on and so on. Which he was, his contention was, of course, as an introvert, was that those were one-sided. They're not. I mean, wholeness is contains all opposites. Hermes is both. He's as home with the evil as he is with the good. So he's a neutral being. So I mean, the whole idea of not being one-sided. Now, go ahead.
What do you think of? What do you think it means that the container is not large enough?
For the as a bridge to the self, yeah, as a bridge to the inner world, that these outer when we're projecting the archetypal contents onto when we're projecting what we used to project in where we were moved by the divine as a Christian, and we're no longer have that available to us anymore because those symbols.
I would think that the words he would use would be that the container is too large for what you're trying to put into it, rather than this is too large for the container, because something like fundamentalism promises more than it delivers.
Well, yeah, I mean, let's just read it again because I can't even remember what it said. He says that the images of myth, if the images of myth do not provide an adequate bridge to the self, in other words, you have to have some type of a symbolic life. You have to have some type of meaning system. You have to create this inner. You have to create a personal myth within yourself that is your personal myth, no one else's personal myth, you know, and that is your bridge to being to allowing your personality number two to come into being. You know, if the images of myth do not provide an adequate bridge to self, the archetypal contents, the images that come up from and that make you an activist of some kind, or make you go after material wealth, or go after whatever it is that just drives you. What are they searching for? What are they looking for? Why are they going after drugs and alcohol and heroin and all this stuff? What is it, the reason that they're doing this? Why do they always want something new, new, new? Well, what Jung is saying and Edinger is saying is that they're really looking for God, but they don't have a God anymore. So they're trying to find God outside themselves in all of these new things, or something that they can throw themselves into, you know. But what Edinger's saying is that the images that come up from our soul, that come up from the God within us, those containers outside of us are not large enough for them, because those are outer containers. They'll never conclude the inner world. So they are a one-sided tree. They're a tree that only has leaves on one side, you know, where the idea is to have a tree. I mean, in other words, what's the synchronistic life? I mean, the synchronistic life, or the synchronistic realm, is one where there is, where matter and spirit are one phenomena. And the whole idea of Jungian psychology, the whole idea of the shamanic religions, and the whole idea of a lot of the Eastern religions, were for our ego awareness to participate in this world where matter and spirit are one phenomena, which does exist. We can't see it, but it's there, and it actually pops up sometimes. You know, whenever you experience a deja vu, or whenever you, you know, these people who experience past lives, or these appearance, you know, I mean, what they're experiencing is that this timeless dimension. Now, Jung said in his whole life he tried to be totally devoted to his outer world. He participated in everything with his whole being. And he said, and yet as he was approaching death, he said, what was important to me were not those historical events in my life. He says, they've faded and are flat. He says, and yet what never loses its newness for me are these images of my personal myth, you know, of Philemon, and of Salome, and of Elijah. And these are, of course, not our psychic contents, but they were his psychic contents. And the idea, of course, again, is, and this is what Charles sent me this interview with Karen Armstrong, is that that other people's myths are not our myth, you know. So unless we can have our own images and develop our own personal myth that's not our historical life. I mean, read Memories, Dreams, and Reflections sometime. Tell me what happened in Jung's life. There's nothing in there about Jung's life. It's all about his relationship with the unconscious. So I guess what I'm saying is nothing is a contradiction of this, because Jung threw his whole being into his outer life. And yet he was saying that the vitalness, the inner aliveness, the alarmness at your inner death, the people who were coming to him with feelings of meaninglessness, these people were experiencing, were searching for something they couldn't find in the outer world. You know, and they're often, he says, they're most successful people you could have asked for. Poets, artists, rich people, politicians, extremely intelligent people. I mean, that were, at the top of their professions. And yet, even though they're at the top of their professions and throwing their whole lives into this work, something is missing, So now I don't know whether this is just a phenomenon, and I'm very interested in what you're saying, Tim. If this is a phenomenon with just introverted people, or if it's extroverted as well.
Well, that what you just described is perfect description of my life. I was pretty darn successful as an artist, and all of a sudden, not suddenly, but over the years after I turned 40, those rewards just became more and more meaningless, until the point where, I don't care how much money I make. I don't care if I get a big, huge exhibition in the Louvre or something like that. What I care about is relationships and the state of my own conversation with God, or my connection with my soul. And so now I live this very, very monk-like life, where I'm participating in the great drama that is my own internal opera.
Well, yeah, and that doesn't contradict any of your what you did in your successful art career,
right?
And
it just fulfills it in a certain way.
Yes, and so I mean, the idea here, I guess, is the whole idea of bringing up the symbolic life and bringing up the if thou wouldst moisten this dry earth, and all of this is why. I mean, the one thing I have not been able to get by or figure out in my own contacts with people, is that the one thing that is at least, I mean, if they're searching for this in Jung, let's say they're seeking, and where they're seeking is in through Jung's writings. I mean, what I don't understand, and this is why I wanted to bring this up initially, is because I don't understand it, and I just don't, and I there's something I'm missing, is that it doesn't have to do with the conscious attitude. I mean, this is the problem I have with a lot of analysts, who want to talk about, how do I feel today, or what's all this. I mean, this is not what I'm seeking. I mean, I call it rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. I mean, that's not what we're seeking. We're seeking the fact that we are dead inside. There's something missing in us. So how do we become alive? And this is what Jung says, that when he tells people that every day they have to set aside some time for their soul, that they laugh in his face. And he's experiencing the same thing. And when he tells them, wait a second, your soul is real, and it lives inside of you, and this imaginal world, which is the combination. It's not spiritual, it's not physical, it's a third thing, that's between the spiritual and the physical world, and it's the imaginal world. It exists, and it's real. And you're not the master in your own awareness, in your own house, and your dreams all tell you that. And when he says, when I would try to tell people that, my belief is the psyche is real, the unconscious is alive, it's a living being. He says, it's like I told somebody they had a rattlesnake in their pocket, and they really did, and they just looked at me and said, oh, I do, and with total unconcern. So I mean, I guess this is the point I'm trying to get across. I couldn't even get across to some analysts sometimes. All they want to do is talk about the conscious attitude and everything. So I really, what I'm trying to introduce a little bit here is this, is what is it about that? How do we individually make this world alive in ourselves? I mean, that's what I'm trying to, the point I'm trying to get across. And
so going back to something you said a second ago, I totally agree with you that all of us introverts are really onto this thing. And it makes me think, gosh, I wonder what would be the appropriate approach for extroverts? Because it seems like in order for an extrovert to be driven to the realities of having to deal with the inner world, they have to be, you know, taken down by a terrible accident or cancer or something, you know, that just absolutely destroys their outer world. So
near-death experience.
Yeah. So I'm wondering.
I mean, this is often what does it, and this is what Charles was speaking of a little bit a while ago. Is that you know, Agnella Yaffe said the road, and this is a religious truth. Okay, the road to the center is through suffering. You know, it's through the ego realizing the ego can't help me now. You know, I mean, this is what every fairy tale says. You know, the sons of the king always fail at the task because the ego, the king, can't help them. Now, you need another type of wisdom now, and this is what the dreams are telling you. The dreams are not telling us that we, you know, need to go to the picket line or whatever. The dreams are saying that you need, that the ego is the servant, or is to lend its awareness to us so that we can become alive, because we are neglected, and we live in the mire and darkness, and we long for the light. And the light we long for is your attention. And any attention that you give to us, we will give into your hands the morning star. And the morning star, you know, is really is imagination. What imagination is always compared to is a celestial body. Okay, so a celestial body is a light, but it's not a spiritual light. It also has mass. It's called the subtle body. So, you know, that is that what our psyche is telling us. Now we can ignore it, and my soul is telling me I'm ignoring it. You know, she says, what would your life be without me, your soul? What, I mean, if you spend your entire existence, and you're already getting pretty old, not paying any attention to me, what were you here for? You know, I mean, you know, the idea, your real purpose, especially, first there's a biological aspect of our lives, and this is the first 40 years that we need to develop our ego awareness to fully develop our human face, to fully develop our ego, to reach the top of the art world, to reach the top of any, you know what Joseph Campbell always says, when you reach the top of the ladder and then you find it's leaning against the wrong wall, you know. So when you find that your ladder's leaning against the wrong wall, what do? You know, and in India, this is called the forest years. You know, the man who has raised his family, all his children are married now and everything. And they've moved back in with the mother, and they're taking care of the mother. Then they go out and become a sannyasi in the forest, you know, and they try to find God. Well, this is the ladder was up against the wrong wall. Now the ego can't help me now. So this is the beginning of Jungian psychology. That's why, you know, Jung said, you know, somebody asked him, why aren't you interested in young people's dreams or children's dreams and stuff? And he says, well, because there's no symbolic content in them, you know? And his wife, Emma Jung, who was an introverted sensate, which is one of the most mysterious psychological types too. If you ever read about psychological types, read about the introverted sensate sometimes. They're very mysterious. But anyway, they make a ritual. Compare them with the extroverted sensate. You know, the extroverted sensate makes this fabulous party, you know, with all these, I'm going to invite this person, this person, this person, you know, it's going to be this, oh, it's going to be wonderful. Well, the introverted sensate's party will be one of ritual, you know, one of where there's all these epiphanies during the party. Well, anyway, his wife is Emma Jung, is this very practical Swiss woman, introverted sensate. And after he says, well, no, I'm not interested in children's dreams because there's no symbolic content in them, you know, and she says, oh, Carl, you're not interested in anybody who doesn't have symbolic content. And what he's saying is he doesn't want to talk to people who are still climbing the ladder and thinking that that's against the right wall. He wants to talk to people who have experienced the suffering of getting to the top of that ladder and to the top of that wall and finding that's not my wall. That's not my wall. Well, now they're ready for the symbolic life. You know, now they're ready for the inner life. Now they're ready for a return from fourness into oneness. You know, and you can never really achieve oneness but what you do is you achieve oneness in what's called, well, the imaginal world is called the third place. And so is the philosopher's stone. It's called the third place. And this is where your ego awareness and your soul and your inner wisdom have a temple where they can meet each other. Because you can't meet the inner world in its world, and the inner world can't meet you in your world. And so they say about this stone that it can't be created by nature. You know, nature can't create it. The ego can't create it. The only thing that can create it is the dialogue between this person who found that his ladder was against the wrong wall, and when he got to the top of it and realized that's not my wall in the first place. What do I do now? You know, and so now he's ready to create the third place. So I guess this is what Jungian psychology is about. You know, it is only for people who've gotten to the top of their ladder and found out that this is not my wall. So if you've reached that point, I think you're ready for the symbolic life. If you haven't reached that point, then you still have some more rungs on your ladder that you need to go up on, you know. So anyway.
What's interesting, I'm about to teach a class. I'm going to teach a class that's kind of about this, I've been teaching figure drawing for many years and becoming increasingly interested in the relationship that we're talking about between the artist and the model. And I want to teach this experience of using the relationship to unfold things within the artist. Mm-hmm. And I'm not so much worried about the older people because of exactly what you're talking about. The people over 40 have already realized their ladder is in the wrong place, and they're going to be eager to find a way to unfold the mystery. I worry about the the younger people who don't realize their ladder's in the wrong place. And how can, and maybe Charles can help me think through this a little bit. How can I appeal to younger people with this idea that there is a greater mystery that they can be in touch with if they use this technique? And maybe it's not possible unless there's some kind of a barrier in their own outer life, or they have some kind of trauma that they can use to make that realization.
I don't know, Charles. I would say that I don't think you can help but be a mentor, Tim. So,
yeah, I mean, I don't really know. I feel like, and I was gonna comment on this earlier. I feel like being as much of a puer I am, I feel like I'm not even on a ladder. I'm just I'm still floating. Part of me is like, why even come down and start to climb a ladder if I already know it's going to be leaned up against the wrong wall. But I think there was something else I was going to comment on also. I feel like I've already lived so much of an inner life, and Jungian psychology appeals to me so much. I've actually had an analyst that I just kind of shocked her, and she's like, you need to be doing first half of life work. Analysis is usually for second half. And it gives me this unsettling feeling that I'm already in my second half. But I mean, which could be, I don't know. You never know. But I don't know how I would try to convey to younger people that there is something more mysterious inside that can be unfolded. I guess, I mean, I looked at outer things that were mysterious that I couldn't explain, like ancient cultures and ancient megaliths and things, and realizing that ancient cultures could do things that we can't do today, and that we don't necessarily understand how we did them, and how they were so wise when they were supposed to be so primitive. You could try to entice them by introducing external things that are very mysterious. But yeah, Craig, I was actually curious on, I don't know, just your thoughts when I say something like, yeah, as a puer, I feel like I'm not even on a ladder. I'm just floating around. Why come down and try to climb a ladder when I know I'm just going to have to
that's
turn around?
my experience was the road of coagulation, of earthing, of coming back to the earth, because the life of the puer is a life of Peter Pan. I mean, it's a life of it being an air being, one who's not connected to the earth, and that was why it was called the land where children never grow up. I mean, that's the puer. The puer means the eternal child, and so you are an eternal child, and the way to the eternal child, puer, is a gift, but it also can be a curse. And the curse is that you are not grounded. And so I think the one thing that the puer needs to do is find some way to earth themselves, to ground, to have both feet on the ground. So I mean, I think that's was my experience. And I think, you mentioned Ettinger's chapter on coagulation, talking about this. Coagulation means to return to the earth, and so, I mean, that's pretty much what it says. But, I think one thing, I was very much fan of Alexander Solzhenitsyn. It was just in the Gulag Archipelago. I mean, one motto they had: you'll know it's true when it happens to you. I mean, a lot of times these people who you're trying to get across something in your classes, they have a radar screen. and that radar screen is at that point not very big, and if it isn't pinging on that radar screen, they're not going to see it. So often the only way that people can ever find this out is to hit bottom. Okay, something has to happen to you where everything is washed away. I mean, this is what usually near-death experience does. Before you waken up to the fact that you're a mortal being, that you are going to die someday, and you're going to meet Persephone when you die, and you're literally going to be one of these poor saps in the hospital who they say, oh, poor so-and-so is terminal, I mean, you've got to have that inner death happen while you're alive. If you want to have really the hopelessness to reach that, to now say, I'm ready for the inner life. I mean, it's go ahead, Tim. Did you want to say something? Oh, well, anyway, I think we will reconvene next time. I mean, we'll just read through that, just a couple more paragraphs, and then do a little bit of symbolic life. And then I'm open to suggestions about any other things you'd want to read or look at that interest you in Jungian psychology, that has brought you to Jungian psychology. Let's do it. But maybe we'll just do one more session on the importance of the inner life. And then so at the end of the next session, please give me any suggestions that you have on what we'd like to consider next. One thing we could consider is the Puer Aeternus. There's a wonderful book by Marie-Louise von Franz, called The Problem of the Puer Aeternus.
I've read that one.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's about...
It was like reading a book about myself. It was unsettling.
Yeah, there's the one book she does about the kingdom of no space, the kingdom with no space. I've been looking for that book. It's in German everywhere, and I've never been able to find it. But anyway, it's a fascinating thing for everybody. And, also von Franz has a book on death. She's got a book on the feminine. And so anyway, why don't you guys look around, say what's interesting to you? And Sandy, feel free to, when you come here, act like you own the joint, tell us all to shut up. And you want to say something. But anyway, you can also just...
Thanks, Craig.
Yes, be who you are too, okay? Okay. All right, well, we'll all meet next time at the same time, and we'll just do a little bit more on the inner life, and then suggestions from anybody. All right? Okay, well,
can you give me the name of that? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
What's the name of that von Franz book on the feminine?
It is on the, I'll send you a copy of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because that sounds interesting to me.
Yeah, if anybody wants
it's the feminine in fairy tales.
Yes, and
yeah.
I'll tell you, it is one of the most wonderful books for a person, whether man, woman, or in between. I mean, I'll tell you, it's one of her best books. I mean, I say that about all her books, also. Okay, well, I'll see you. Hopefully, see you all next time.
Yeah, thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
everybody.
That was a very good discussion today.
Bye, you all.
Yeah.
Okay, bye now.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.